Hey, Patrick.
Hey, Michael J.
So they came at us pretty hard with some more previews for the new set, and some of these are gold and orange and 3 casting cost, and I don't know what else.
Yeah, there's all sorts of... there's a few other costs, too, but man, are there some 3-cost gold cards.
Oh, yeah.
Are you thinking like Dovin Grand Arbiter, for instance?
He is very high on my list, but he is not alone tonight.
So Dovin is 1 white-blue for a 3 loyalty Planeswalker. His +1 ability until end of turn. Whenever a creature you control deals combat damage to a player, put a loyalty counter on Dovin Grand Arbiter, which is in addition to the +1 you get just for using the ability.
So if you've got like a meddling mage on turn 2 or something, right? Anything on turn 2, you play Dovin, you go loyalty 3 to loyalty 4, and then get in there. You get an additional loyalty just from smacking somebody, right?
Right. You do have to do at least 1 damage, so Ornithopters won't count. But if, for instance, you played some combination of like 1/1 flying lifelink and 1/2 flyers and such, if you played 3 creatures in the first 2 turns, if you drop Dovin Ban on turn 3, you could potentially have his loyalty at 7 right out the gate.
Wow. So you could just go like, 1 drop and then 2 casting cost token production or something, have 3 guys out there and just in.
Right. So then the second ability, -1, create a 1/1 colorless Thopter artifact creature token with flying. You gain 1 life. And then finally, -7, look at the top 10 cards of your library, put 3 of them into your hand, and the rest on the bottom of your library in a random order.
So that second one is a really important ability. I think that the first one is really like a kind of a gear turner, but the second ability does 2 things which are really important. One of them is it gives you a way to win, right? And separately gives you a way to kind of defend Dovin, right? So one of the tests that people put on Planeswalkers is how well does this defend itself? This can at least get a block out there and give you a life, but it also gives you a body, a random body, if you didn't have any others, to start the +1 ability going. And you can swarm somebody out and kill them with Thopters.
Well, plus the life matters for stuff like the life gain synergies. Like, for instance, if you're already playing 1/1 flying lifelink, I mean, what if you just have some like Leon and, like you're just getting a little extra value out of that life, not just for the racing, but also for pumping your guys.
Oh, yeah. So like you could just have Pridemate on turn 2, turn 3 Dovin, up 3/3 Pridemate.
Right. So but another part of it, though, is that the card can also be sort of a spectral procession on a time delay, right?
Yep, absolutely.
But the -7 is kind of interesting because this is not, the most game winning of Ultimate, but it's also a very obtainable one, right?
Yeah, I mean, you could be at 7 on turn 4 very plausibly, like you said. If you go like turn 1 Legion's Landing or something, turn 2, 2 tokens, and then Dovin starts on 3, you go +1 goes to 4, all 3 connect, 4 + 3 is 7. The next turn, you're at 7 loyalty already, and you can just go -7.
There's no chance you want to just play like some sort of stuff like, I mean, what if you had some of the blue flyers too, and you're playing like a Skies deck, right? Like with Siren Stormtamer, for instance, is yet another, 1-drop flyer you could play. And there's no shortage of 1/1 unblockable type of cards, right? Like you could realistically play, and maybe you got some other payoffs too, like, the Curiosity variant, like if you're, I don't know, maybe there's something there.
So are you, kind of thinking that we start with that mono blue attack deck that Nassif was playing at the beginning of the format, and then maybe swap out some X4s for Dovins and splash a little white?
Oh, I think whatever deck you're playing, you got to be in for the 1/1. You got to be in for the -1 ability. Like I think the -1 ability, you are exactly right. That's the primary thing that you're doing. But I just think the threat of the other part is like an interesting thing to consider. It's probably not worth warping your strategy too heavily, but I do think you got to be playing with a bunch of, like, I think that's part of the equation, because I think the threat of that ultimate is the only thing that gives teeth to that +1 ability.
Yeah, so I think that Dovin is the kind of card that can just kind of win the game by itself. And it's kind of deceptive in that. But even though you said that the -7 isn't just kind of this, it's not a game over ultimate like we often see on a Planeswalker, this card is only 3, right? It's super cheap to get out relative to the kind of impacts it can potentially be making on a game.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, it is a really cheap to get out threat, and if they can't react to it in time, it's not game winning necessarily, but it frequently will give you such an advantage that you can leverage it. The whole getting 3 of the top 10 cards of your library. The only thing that's tricky though is that if you end up filling your deck with like Suntail Hawk type of cards, looking at the top 10 might not give you the most powerful of 3 cards. It might, but you probably don't want to make your strategy too warped,
Yeah, I think like in some decks, Dovin can just come down and then he could just do that spectral procession action you were talking about. Like maybe just do 2 tokens and then do a +1, and then that gives you further fuel, and they're just kind of nickel and diming you.
When you can put them under a ton of pressure, right? Like if the first time you drop Dovin, if you actually hit with 2 creatures, that you're already at 6, your opponent has so little time to react to Dovin before you're potentially just getting a huge, an ultra super duper dig through time.
Yeah, I think the other thing about this is you can also go over, right? So you're talking about, all right, they're at 6. You don't naturally go from 6 to 7 in this Planeswalker, right? Like a lot of them, you go 6 to 7. This one, you might go to 6 to 9, right? 6 to 10 or 6 to 8 at least. Just the nature of that +1 ability, which means that the ultimate isn't alone, right? Like you can ultimate it and then still plausibly have some loyalty for some additional +1 or even -1s.
Yeah. And I think, Dovin's going to suck up a lot of damage. There's a little bit of a Gideon thing going on, just in terms of how much damage it might take some people to kill Gideon. Like if you're racing and you're hitting your opponent with flyers every turn, they might have to send a bunch of creatures at Dovin just to keep him in check.
Yeah, I actually really like that about the -1 ability on Dovin, which is like you get a body to kind of, it doesn't matter how big their guy is if they don't have trample, soak up whatever they're sending at Dovin. But the fact that you're also gaining life at the same time is it's just a little extra annoying. And I think like that kind of stuff adds up, even if you don't have an Ajani's Pride mate.
Mm-hmm. Well, so where are you at on Dovin?
I think this card is definitely going to be playable. I think that either it's going to be like a coastal piracy type card that we see in kind of the Pirate Skies archetype, or some sister archetype to that is small white and blue creatures. Or I actually think that this is a kind of card that could be played in a more controlling strategy, and like it's just a key permanent that you would have in the same way that like Gideon 3 was played in blue-white decks, for example. It's not so intuitive there, but it does a lot of the things that a control deck would want, especially a control deck that has other Planeswalkers. Right, so if you've got like multiple Planeswalkers going, like you've got this and Karn and Teferi all in your list, it doesn't have to be the most impressive thing in the world because you're giving the opponent so many choices of things that they've got to attack. And I mean, like these are Thopters. Thopters are friends with Karn's constructs automatically.
That's true.
So, and then this color combination is highly synergistic with Karn, highly synergistic with the history of Benalia, and highly synergistic with Teferi. Like there is a blue-white control deck, like kind of a light permission, heavy on the Settle the Wreckage, heavy on the treasure map type deck. I can imagine with this card, and all those cards are going to play really well together. They're all really high quality cards. I think it's going to be a lot of games won.
Yeah, I think Dovin's a solid role player. I think there's going to be some purpose there, and I also think there might be a little extra incentive to play a few more flyers. Like I could see Dovin fitting slightly better into a version along the lines of what you're describing, but with some elements of like blue-white flash.
Yeah, I was thinking like Gerard Capuchin, History Benalia, some Planeswalkers.
Right, that kind of stuff,
And like that's an archetype that we know was at least plausible from maybe half a turn ago in terms of the format.
So the question is Dovin the best 3-cost Planeswalker in this set?
I think from what I know so far, I want to say yes, but I would love to hear your thoughts on Orzhov's entry, Kaya, Orzhov Usurper.
1 white-black for a 3 loyalty Planeswalker, +1, exile up to 2 target cards from a single graveyard. You gain 2 life if at least 1 creature card was exiled this way. -1, exile target non-land permanent with converted mana cost 1 or less. And then -5, Kaya Orzhov Usurper deals damage to target player equal to the number of cards that player owns in exile, and you gain that much life.
So here's my read of this card so far. Really interesting sideboard option for some decks. I don't know when I would want to play this in the main deck as part of a proactive mix.
Because you're playing Modern and you have Relic of Progenitus in your deck.
So you're just using Relic of Progenitus and the Orzhov Usurper as like kind of a 2-card combo to punch someone in the face?
Yeah, and it's not like you're not going to get some value out of the -1 exile target non-land permanent with converted mana cost 1 or less. Right, like that's got some uses in Modern, right? But
yeah, I was going to say it turns off not Deathcore Scavenger, but the 1-drop green-black eye, but that guy's banned.
Right, I'm saying if you play Kaya, you got to go. You play her in plus, and then if you can plus 1 more time, the next turn she's frequently going to be threatening 20.
Well, you get a lot of like just free wins with this card, like decks that are reliant on graveyard in any way, even like the amount of taxation you put on Snapcaster mages, but certainly against the Stinkweed Imp type folks.
And if you play against any Joker playing a red deck, you put her down, you gain 2 life immediately, and she's a 4 loyalty. And it's not always obvious that they can do. It's not always easy for them to do increments of exactly 4. So they might have to waste 6 damage killing her, 5 or 6 damage, right? So like she's frequently going to be like a drain or like a gain 6 to 7 life against a red deck.
Oh, for 3. I mean, you could just drop this card and then just execute their Goblin Guide, right? Like that's not good for them either.
But the -5 being a drain for 20, it is suspend 2, but a suspend 2 drain for 20 is like. That's at least worth thinking about.
Well, they don't necessarily have that many cards in exile yet.
There are a lot of ways to mill 10 cards or whatever from your opponent's deck in Modern.
Yeah. So not a standard card necessarily, but a Modern monster you're thinking.
I don't know about monster. Fringe Curiosity?
Curiosity in like the classic sense, or curiosity in the
curiosity like it's curious, like more like Ripley's Believe It or Not curiosity.
Yeah, that's what I was asking.
Rather than Guinness Book of World Records.
Well, I was really thinking like a creature enchantment you might put on a fish.
Yeah.
So yeah, I thought this card was pretty cool, and I thought it might be a sideboard monster.
So. The prospect of using her in standard, however, so there's a little bit of life gain going on there. Even if you're not like getting them for like oodles, it's not necessarily out of the question. Like you put her down and you plus her twice, and already you're talking about doing a soul feast, and that's if there's nothing else going on.
I mean, there are a lot of one-casting cost creatures you could be executing in standard. It's no big deal.
So, yeah, I think she's going to be harder to work. But there's, she does some novel enough stuff. It's a cool enough design that I want to see whether there are options there are. I think it's really going to end up living or dying, though, on the strength of that -5.
I mean, Standard's got some supplementation, right? Nothing like a Relic of Progenitus. But, there's some stuff that, kind of a Deadeye tracker, something like that.
Yeah, and you never know. You play against somebody who's playing some Izzet deck and they've exiled enough of their stuff.
Oh, I mean, yeah, obviously Drake's... this is what I meant when I said, this might be a sideboard monster. You land this card and it successfully hits against the Drake's deck, they are... It's not that they've automatically lost already, but they don't like that situation, right? They're kind of Niv Mizzet or bust at that point. You just turn Search for Azcanta off, right? They're just never going to get to 7. That. They're all right, I guess I have a kind of a weak scrying ability. Unlikely I get to 7. And, messes up Drake's and so the fact that you're gaining life at the same time that's also problematic for them. That deck is about explosive punches and winning on a clock.
Yeah. So I think I share your sentiment. Dovin seems a little bit better, but I think Kea is definitely worth keeping an eye on for the any possible combos. There's a different blue-white 3-drop, though, that you might have been eyeing. Deputy of Detention.
Wow, Deputy of Detention. This card it seems really good to me.
So this is 1 white blue for a 1/3, and it's a lot like Banisher Priest type of cards, right? Fiend Hunter, all those type of cards where it's going to exile something when you play it. But there's 2 important little twists. The first is that it can hit any non-land permanent, not just a creature.
Yeah.
So already you've upgraded to some sort of an Oblivion Ring type of deal instead of just hitting a creature. But what's more, you also hit all other non-land permanents with the same name. So you get a whole detention sphere out of it.
Yeah, it's Deputy of Detention Sphere, really. Right? This card seems... I mean, other than the 3 toughness, this card seems spectacularly strong to me. It's like a direct answer to everything from Search for Azcanta to Rekindling Phoenix.
Planeswalkers.
Yikes. Even when they get out, if you're going to...
They have to start over.
Hit a Planeswalker or a treasure map, they're back to nil.
Right. This card seems real good.
Yeah, whiz-bang 4 of and decks that can cast it that don't mind having a creature, I think.
Well, I don't know. You got to be careful because there's more whiz-bang 4 of 3-drops than you can play. So you got to draw the line somewhere. Like you were talking about Absorb, you were talking about Deputy of Detention, you were talking about Dovin, Grand Arbiter, you were talking about History of Benalia. There's a lot of good 3s. I think the competition is just very, very steep at the 3-drop now. This card's going to be a 4 of in some decks, but I don't think it's an automatic. I think you got to actually care about the 1/3 body.
That's fair. Probably more people who were hyped for like a Reflector Mage in the past or something are gonna I meant just they don't mind having a creature in their deck, 4 creature slots. I think that there are a lot of decks that theoretically can tap for 3 mana, including a white and a blue on turn 3, that just don't want a guy no matter how good that guy is. All right, a standard blue-white control deck in the past wouldn't necessarily have played Reflector Mage, and yet there are other decks where Reflector Mage was the most warping card that they could be playing.
Right. If you want an answer to Planeswalkers, though, dude, what about Mass Manipulation? XX blue, gain control of X target creatures and or Planeswalkers.
That's a lot in that top right.
You're not a buyer on this one?
So if I want 1, it costs me 6. Is that right?
For 6, you get a confiscate you don't have to give back.
Yep. And then for 8, I get 2.
Yeah.
I'm a buyer.
But
it's a lot of...
Think about Dragonlord Silumgar that doesn't go wrong.
No, I'm a buyer. I got it.
Their Planeswalker's going to ultimate, and then you get them.
I've always been down for a confiscate. At least just one. I've had 1 confiscate. Yeah, in a lot of successful decks.
There's a lot of things going on in that upper right corner. It's kind of hard to do a little too. Listening to that song too much is kind of.
Well, it's a lot of blue pips. That's all.
Yeah, but you wanted that anyway.
Yeah, I like this. I mean, obviously, taking a Planeswalker, what's better than that? Yeah, it's good.
If miss it.
Yeah, they get a ping on you. Niv Mizzet is so insane. I got my opponent down to 2 last night, and he just like ripped a Niv Mizzet, and I'm like, oh, he's not going to beat me, is he? Yeah, he did. He did. Just
Dude, Deputy of Detention, great answer to Niv Mizzet.
oh yeah, it doesn't even trigger that guy.
So mass manipulation, kind of, very small numbers. Maybe you play one. Maybe you've got 1 or 2 in your sideboard. If you were in the market for stuff like Confiscation Coup, you might like mass manipulation. Or if you just want to be, if you would play Dragonlord Silmgar, maybe, you just want some powerful answers to Planeswalkers.
I'm a buyer on this card. I think that I would play 1 copy in the main deck of a lot of different control-ish decks. I think that one flex slot that the Drake's decks have right now where they play that like quadra.
That's what I was thinking.
Yeah, I'd rather have this than that.
Right. Well, what about Sphinx of Foresight? 2 blue for a 4/4 flyer, and you can reveal it from your opening hand. If you do, scry 3 at the beginning of your first upkeep. And at the beginning of your upkeep, when you have this Sphinx in play, you get to scry 1 every upkeep,
So, number 1, I'm a buyer. Number 2, I think this is the most interesting design of a Magic card I have seen in I don't know how many years, since maybe Form of the Dragon. I think...
Really?
Yes. The most interesting design, and I like this card. 2 things. Number 1, this is like a really leyline-ish effect. It's a card that gives you a meaningful ability for no mana for just being in your opening hand. So obviously that encourages you to play a lot of copies. Think about how different it is when you're playing a game that you have like, a white or a black leyline in a sideboarded game in Modern. Whether or not you had that card in your opening hand, profound difference on your win expectation. Like if you've got like a white leyline against a red deck, like you turn off half their deck, right? And you didn't pay any mana for it. Same thing with a black leyline against a dredge deck. I think obviously Sphinx of Foresight is less profound of an impact on the game, but like free scry 3 is not nothing.
It's not free.
You pay
You're saying free like no mana cost.
Yeah, you pay the deck building cost, right?
Right, because like how strong is scry 3? Well, later in the game it's super strong, but in your opening hand it's nice, it's useful. Is scry 3 really worth more than half a card in your opening hand?
But this card,
if it is, it's not by much. No, hold on. But let's walk through this. So maybe the scry 3 is worth somewhere. Would you agree it's somewhere between half a card and like 0.67 at the most?
I would agree. If what you're asking is this worth less than just the scry 3 ability, is it worth less than a card? And the answer is yes.
And it's worth at least half a card, but not much more. It might be worth half a card.
I agree. It's worth more than half a card, less than a full card.
So if I would say it's not more than 2/3 of a card. But anyway, let's call it some amount more than half a card, less than a card. How many? You have 7 looks at Sphinx of Foresight being in your opening hand, right? You have only 7. How many cards are you going to see in the course of the game?
Oh, I mean, it depends on your deck.
A deck that has Sphinx of Foresight in it.
Oh, I think that a deck that has Sphinx of Foresight in it is liable to see more than 25 cards a game.
So let's say that you're seeing about 28 cards a game. Let's call it 25. Let's just make it 25.
Okay.
So that's roughly for every Sphinx of Foresight you get in your opening hand, you got to look at 2.5 Sphinx of Foresights that are not in your opening hand.
That you don't want necessarily later.
Well, just that it's not the opening hand. You might still want it. It's a 4/4 flyer at the beginning of your upkeep, scry 1. But I'm just trying to put a price on that first ability. It looks to me like you're talking about roughly 22% of your Sphinx of Foresights being in your opening hand. And if 22% of the time you're getting 2/3 of a card, then your equity which is not smoothly distributed, but your equity is somewhere in the ballpark of maybe 14 or 15. We'll call it 15% of a card. So you get 1/7 of a card, about roughly 1/7 of a card, and in exchange for 1/7 of a card, you are playing with a 4/4 flyer at the beginning of your upkeep scry 1. Would you play with a 4/4 flyer at the beginning of your upkeep scry 1? I don't think that's close.
That's an extraordinarily low power creature for standard. Right? Like
so
it's not I don't think it's clearly past the line of unplayable, but that is very, very weak relative to I just set the bar at Crackling Drake or Ravenous Chupacabra. This card's probably weaker than either of those cards.
By a great deal. It doesn't draw you a card, it draws you 1/7 of a card.
Yeah, both of those cards are essentially card advantage engines, and Ravenous Chupacabra steals some X amount of mana, and Crackling Drake just kills them. So
now, don't get me wrong, Crackling Drake doesn't draw you the card until you play it. Sphinx of Foresight at least has the decency to give you your value 4 turns before you play the card. And
not
I think
if you drew it like second in the game.
well, then you didn't have any value that game anyway. When you get the value, it's in your opening hand, is way better than you drawing in your opening hand a card that won't give you value until turn 5 or turn 4. So I'm willing to say that even if this card is only giving you 1/7 of a card, that it gives you the value so much earlier than you actually play the card. I could even believe an argument for this card being worth double, where you're getting 30% of a card. I think that's generous, but I could believe it. My issue is that a 4/4 flyer at the beginning of your upkeep scry 1 seems so far away from what's... Compare it to Nico Bolas.
Well, Nico Bolas is also a 4/4 flyer for 4. He has, he's got the same thing as Crackling Drake or Ravenous Chupacabra. He gets you for a card to begin with. And, 2 turns later, if you haven't killed it, you're dead. He gets you. He's like a Crackling Drake. He just gets you a different way.
So to me, I think this card, I am a seller on Sphinx of Foresight. I don't think it's out of the question, but I just think that I am skeptical that we have just such a need for 4/4 flyers. It's possible. I think the sex appeal is tricking you.
Part of me was thinking like I would definitely want to play it in decks that had like Azor's Gateway, so I could get rid of it for its 4/4 flyerness. But maybe I'm just overrating 0 casting cost library manipulation that doesn't actually draw a card. Super plausible.
So I don't know. It's worth, thinking about looking at. I do agree with you. It's a very interesting design. There's going to be stuff it's hard to know the ramifications of it, but I'm suspicious.
Yeah,
put it that way.
It's like weird as a combo piece, right? Like, because on one hand, if the card did like not anything else, but a great wide swath of other relatively mediocre regular text box stuff other than being a 4/4 flyer for 4, that ability, opening hand ability, might make it very attractive in certain combo decks. But what ends up happening is you have like this kind of mulligan prevention or kind of deck stacking ability, and then in return you're mulliganing. Because like real combo decks don't really probably want a 4/4 flyer for 4.
Yep. So yeah, I don't know. I'm skeptical, but I just think it's weird that they have Scry 1 in a block with Surveil. But whatever, who am I to judge? What do you think of Biomancer's Pet? Green-blue for a 2/2 mutant. Activated abilities of creatures you control cost up to 2 less to activate. This effect can't reduce the amount of mana an ability costs to activate to less than 1 mana. And you can tap it until end of turn. The next time target creature adapts, it adapts as if it had no +1/+1 counters on it.
Well, it passes an initial bar, which is 2/2 for 2 mana. I think like if you're playing a deck that has the adaptability, and I think I just have to see more context in the set. I think there are a fair number of mechanics that you see only one or two cards. You're like, this isn't good enough to play. But maybe there's decks that want to adapt a lot or have a lot of mana intensive abilities where this would be really, really attractive. Like, imagine for a second there was like some sort of rebel searching mechanic, right? But it was in green and blue. The ability to reduce those activated ability costs by 2 would be incredibly attractive, right? So I don't know. I feel like anything that's reducing mana costs, I usually want to at least look twice at. But the second ability is kind of cool. I mean, I don't know if that ever gets out of hand, right? So that adaptability hasn't seemed too overpowered to me yet. But, I don't know. A lot of the time, it doesn't matter how little a guy costs. If all a guy does is get big and attack you, I usually, I put it in a certain category, and that's not the scary category.
What do you think of this with activated abilities that make mana? Like, for instance, obviously, if you were using, so like Soulblight Flamekin, for instance, in Lorwyn, you can pay 2 to give target creature trample until end of turn, and if this is the third time this ability has resolved this turn, you may add 8 red to your mana pool. So if you've got Soulblight Flamekin and Biomancer's Pet, instead of having to spend 6 mana to do the ability 3 times, you only have to spend 3 mana, and then you get 8 mana.
I certainly hadn't thought of that. That seems pretty powerful.
Or let's say you're playing with Guild Mage, the one that does the copying. There's a Guild Mage in Modern that costs 2 and then an and you can copy stuff that if you just make it if you reduce the cost of the ability by 2, you can just fork something as many times as you want, and if it's a ritual, you have infinite mana.
Oh, that's cool.
And like playing with 2 different creatures that cost 2 and then just making a ritual fork infinitely is kind of sick. Like, to me, this seems like this is like so just gonna be like to me this seems like there's gonna be a Modern deck built around abusing this with some sort of exploitive activated ability that if you reduce it from 3 to 1 or 4 to 2, you're gonna get so unreal of an ROI that you just go infinite.
I don't know. Yeah, I mean he's kind of small for that task, isn't he?
Why? You win with haste.
Okay.
You just put it down and you go infinite. Boom.
You stockpile it and then get him.
Stockpile him.
Yeah, like he's just in hand. Like you don't. Well, no,
you can get him back. It's the same like the Malira combo.
I see.
You just play, and like he dies a lot. But you got ways to get him back, and you just keep playing cards, and every so often, like maybe you just go collect a company and you reveal this guy in a Guild Mage, and then like, all right.
I guess like putting a counter on a Walking Ballista for 1 mana, for 2 mana isn't the worst.
Yeah, I mean, I think we're going to find that there's some very abusable interactions that you can do with this guy. Besides, you can play Training Ground too, so you've got redundancy. You can play with Biomancer's Pet and Training Ground. And having 8 versions of that effect instead of just 4, you could make your combo so much more reliable.
Are there any like +1/+1 counter things that are cheaper that this guy would be great with?
I'm sure. We'll have to just look. The big thing to look for is cards that cost 2 colorless and a blue or 2 colorless and a green or whatever, Mm-hmm. I mean, the dream would be if you can find a card that's like a Basalt Monolith type of deal,
Oh, yeah. Then that's just really just infinity.
But, so I don't know. I think I predict Matt Nass breaks this card.
So I want to round it out with a 3 casting cost gold card, gold in 2 places that we didn't hit on yet, and get your take on Judith the Scourge Diva.
Scourge Diva. She's 1 black red for a 2/2. Other creatures you control get +1/+0. And whenever a non-token creature you control dies, Judith the Scourge Diva deals 1 damage to any target. And this includes herself.
Yeah. So I looked at this like, isn't this just like an easier to cast Banalish Marshal? Like, like this card is awesome, right? And like has a second ability.
Yeah, I mean it's +1/+0 instead of +1/+1.
I get it.
And she's a 2/2 instead of a 3/3.
I get it all.
So she's making some sacrifices.
And
so I don't think it's just better than Banalish Marshal, but it's different. It seems a little easier to wield. And that second ability is amazing to me.
Yeah, like, but there are like Boros decks that can't even cast a Banalish Marshal because WWW is so difficult. Like this is going to be it could be splashed in some decks. It's a pretty easy cast for a dedicated Rakdos deck, and like you just said, that second ability is big. It's big ups.
So I think she looks solid in some sort of if you're playing some kind of like Sam Black deck or something, like I think you're going to have to want a little bit of the go wide experience, and at the same time be in a spot where you have like you'll prioritize having a sack outlet or some way to actually get a kill with her, but maybe not. There is some Blood Artist stuff going on too. That's a big part of it, is how much this looks like a Blood Artist.
You don't think there's just like kind of a medium sort of identity for Judith where it's just like a good card that you would put in?
Yeah, there is. I mean, the fact that her values
of decks.
Yeah, I think you can. It's you want to be careful about putting too many. It's not like a legend that I think you just automatically are like, let me slam 4 of these.
Yeah. I mean, diminishing returns on this card is obviously very different. Banalish Marshal, if you draw 3, you can just cast 3. Judith, if you draw 3, you just mulligan twice.
And you do have to do a version that cares. Well, not necessarily. The second one's you get to do them for 1. Like you legend rules, so you write off
ting them. Yeah.
Okay. Ting. There's 1.
Oh no, that's for 2, right? There's 2 Judiths.
It is 2. Yep, you're right. That's 2. That's not nothing. That's something.
All right. Get you for 2.
It is interesting though. The whole non-token aspect really does push you towards it being a little bit more fair. Using it a little bit more above the board.
Oh, but I think like if they didn't put that non-token clause, there'd be problems.
Yeah. Just with the combo kill.
Yeah, there's just too many hyper efficient sources of like 1/1 tokens that are even available in just everywhere. It's just standard, whatever. I mean, like think about this with the 3 casting cost Mentor Goblin. Just as an example, like
sure,
like you can't do that. That's not fair.
So what's your pick for the best of the cards we covered today? Oh, there is one more. We might as well talk about Hydroid Crassus. The X green blue 0/0 jellyfish Hydra Beast. When you cast Hydroid Crassus, you gain half X life and draw half X cards, round down each time, and it's a XX flyer trample. It's a 0/0 that enters with X +1/+1 counters already.
Yeah, so Hydroid Crassus, if you just cast it for 2, X is 0.
Nice.
So it's just a 0/0. If you cast it for 3, still not big enough.
Right? 1/1 flying trample, not that great.
But if you cast it for 4, then it's a 2/2.
Flying trample, gain 2 life, and draw a card.
Draw cards, yeah. So, yeah.
That's not that. I mean, that's 1 cheaper than a Mole Drifter, and then you get 2 life instead of. It's like the later Mole Drifter, that except you draw 1 less card and it's 1 mana cheaper. But then you start getting the money at 6.
The cloud guy.
Yeah, but then you start getting paid at 6 because you can still pay 5. If you pay 5, it's not like that's a sucker's play. You still get a 3/3 flying trample, draw a card, gain 3 life. At 6, however. For 6, you get a 4/4 flyer, and you draw 2 cards, and you gain 2 life, right?
I'm in for anything that you just described.
So you get the cloud, you get the Cloud Guy so you can, for a mana less than the Cloud Guy, get the Cloud Guy without drawing for one less card. And for a mana more than the Cloud Guy, you can get the Cloud Guy. And this is with Trample, of course. But not only do you get the Cloud Guy, you're also getting a 4/4 flying Trample. So that extra mana is buying you +2/+2. But then you can't abuse it by blinking it, which is an important thing. You lose that whole aspect, which was a big part of that guy's jam.
Okay.
But with Hydroid Crassus, if you get up to 8 mana, now you're drawing 3 cards and getting a 6/6 flying Trampler and getting 3 life, which is whatever. But, that's, I don't know. You have to have some sort of big way to get a lot of mana. I think this guy, you'd have to be both in for, the 2/2 flyer draw card, but also have tons of elf mana generation type of stuff where you just got the sync later, Maybe if you care about the +1/+1 counters enough.
Well, if you're just casting it for 6, which I think the reasonable upper limit for a card is 6. People do more than you're starting to get an unreasonable range, right? So at 6, your guys pretty small for a 6 drop, but pretty big for a creature. And then you have 2 reasonably good effects on that. I think that is, it's in the neighborhood of a Titan, right? A little small, but in the neighborhood of.
Nah, but he also just doesn't do anything when you attack.
But the thing that I do like about this card is at 4, it's better than a Striped Bear. Right?
Definitely.
So, and Striped Bear.
That's right. I was going to say, you got to be in for the 2/2 flying draw card. Gain of life.
I think that is the thing that makes me say this card seems a little clunky, but I think I might be able to find a home for him because he's just better than a Striped Bear. And a Striped Bear.
He's not just, though, because the whole thing with Striped Bear is how much you could blink him.
Yeah, I guess. Yeah. I mean, he's on the order of a Solemn Simulacrum, right? Maybe how much is the Rampant Growth better than one of these other triggered abilities?
A lot. And he doesn't draw a card when he dies. I think this card is a worse Prime Speaker Zagata.
Yeah?
Yeah.
I mean,
sorry.
All right. I'd have to noodle on this. I thought this card was going to be a lot of work, but that maybe the work might pay off.
Yeah. I think the key is that this guy's floor is not that bad. A 2/2 flying draw card, as long as you're in for 2/2 flying draw card and gain a life, that's at least something. I think the +1/+1 counter synergies are going to be the real question.
Okay. So you asked me a question. I'll answer it. Dovin is my pick for the week. How about you?
Maybe. God, I don't know. I'm more the mass manipulation guy, but probably Deputy of Detention is my guy.
Yeah, I think all those are good cards. But you know what else is a good card?
What else?
Tune in tomorrow and find out.
Life didn't work so great. Tried to play Dredge, so jailer hate. Ghostly prison waiting for my untapped phase. Your core trapped in amber stasis state. Lost a lot of friends, got left behind. Had to find a way not to lose my mind. Trapped in a vault with nothing but time. Parents and my friends were the key to find. Magic gave me purpose and drive. To gain the love, it kept me alive. Visions of better weather, light inside. See through the mirage, gotta survive.